You okay, sir?" The words floated down with a hint of concern, barely above the low hum of the diner's morning shuffle. The young waitress was probably just following her training, top off every cup, don't linger, smile, but when her hand paused, Frank's world narrowed in on the gleam of that single silver dog tag hanging just above her apron, swinging side to side like a tiny metronome of fate. Funny thing about time, some days you feel every second you've ever lived in one blinding flash. In that moment, 75-year-old Frank Mullally wasn't sitting in a sunlit booth off some dusty old highway. He was back in a jungle, surrounded by thick humidity and the smell of gunpowder, holding a friend as he slipped away. Yeah, that's how stories like this start. Real quiet, real ordinary, until something cracks open inside you. This wasn't Frank's first Wednesday morning alone since Margaret died, nor was it the first time he'd nursed a bitter cup of coffee in this faded diner, its checkered tile worn thin, jukebox stuck in a silent loop nobody bothered to fix. Since 2015, he kept the same routine: black coffee, newspaper, minimal talk, scan the obits for familiar names. Life, if you can call it that, had settled into this strange, predictable limbo. The only wild card was the staff, coming and going with the seasons. Today, that wild card had brown hair in a ponytail and a polite, almost nervous smile. She poured his coffee with care, not really seeing him, until he saw that flash of metal. The dog tag, mostly hidden, caught a stray beam of sunlight as she bent to serve the next table. For a split second, Frank's breath hitched. He told himself it was nothing, but he'd never been good at lying to himself. "Your name, miss?" he asked, surprising himself more than her. "Jenna," she replied, the dog tag glinting again. "Family thing, my uncle wore it in Vietnam. Mom gave it to me." He nodded, but the coffee cooled untouched, hands shaking as the newspaper headlines blurred. Old memories, locked tight for decades, started leaking through the cracks. At home, he dug out the shoebox from his closet, a time capsule of regrets and honor. 6 young faces grinned up at him from a faded photograph, arms draped over each other, jungle gear and hope in their eyes. Next to the photo, a folded American flag, medals no one ever asked about, and a matching dog tag, Private First Class Liam Calder, O positive, 1969. Frank traced the letters, remembering a 19-year-old kid who drew diner menus in the mud, talking about the restaurant he'd open if he ever got out. Frank, only 2 years older, played the big brother role for their recon team outside Da Nang, the world's oldest 21-year-old. You know what I mean? Some ghosts don't haunt houses. They haunt breakfast, quiet routines, a stranger's jewelry. That night, Frank's sleep was shredded by jungle sounds, rotor blades, shouting, the sickening quiet that falls right before everything goes wrong. In '69, they'd been ambushed. Liam took shrapnel and didn't last long. "Tell my sister I wasn't scared," he'd whispered, words meant to carry past the noise, past the years. Frank had written home, letter marked, address unknown, tucked away in that same envelope for half a century. Next morning, Frank returned to the diner, not quite sure why. Jenna, still learning the ropes, refilled his cup. The tag slipped out. "May I see that?" His hand trembled as he turned the tag over. Liam Calder. "Oh, positive. 1969. Jenna nodded. "He was my uncle. My mom never talks about it." Frank's voice broke. "He died with me," he said quietly. Jenna slid into the booth, urgency in her eyes. "What do you remember about him?" "Everything. He joked about pancakes. He wanted your mom to know he wasn't afraid." She squeezed his hand, voice barely a whisper. "She needs to hear that." Suddenly, it was clear. Maybe this was why he was still here, drinking bad coffee after all these years, waiting for the chance to keep his word. Days passed. Jenna was gone. Frank wondered if he'd driven her away with all that talk of war and death. But the following Sunday, she reappeared, this time in street clothes, with an older woman at her side. Mrs. Calder looked like someone who'd survived things without ever speaking of them, shoulders squared, hair steel gray, eyes sharp as razors. Jenna handed Frank a manila envelope, her hands trembling. Inside, the letter he'd written in 1969, returned, unopened, marked with 1,000 little postal scars. "She wants to know," Jenna said quietly. "She wants to see what you remember." Frank offered the original, voice shaking. Mrs. Calder finally spoke, her words the sound of a door opening after years of silence. Was he suffering? Frank didn't flinch. Yes, but he wasn't afraid. He wanted you to know he was proud to be your brother. Tears welled up in her eyes, a lifetime of grief finally slipping free. Did he really talk about pancakes? Frank laughed, voice rusty. Nonstop. He said he'd open a place, name every menu after Beatles songs. For the first time since the war, Mrs. Calder cried openly. They talked for an hour, piecing together a life interrupted, memories, stories, laughter, all the things that war tries to erase. As they left, Frank pressed Liam's dog tag into Jenna's palm, his own hands finally steady. He'd want you to have this. Jenna clutched the medal. Her mother embraced Frank. Thank you for keeping him alive, she whispered. I thought everyone had forgotten. Frank held her close. You never forget a brother. Not ever. Mrs. Calder asked softly, would you visit his grave with us? Frank nodded. It would be an honor. At the cemetery, beneath a new planted oak, Jenna placed both tags, her uncle's, and a fresh one of her own, at the roots. Frank snapped a crisp salute. Mrs. Calder shared stories Frank had given her, making Liam real again for a new generation. The letter from 1969 was finally read aloud, its words finally landing where they were meant to go. Afterward, Jenna thanked Frank. You carried him for 50 years. Now we can carry him forward. That hit Frank in a way he hadn't felt in decades. He realized his routine wasn't about coffee or habit, but about connection, about honoring promises, keeping the past alive so it could finally heal. In the weeks that followed, the diner changed. Servers greeted Frank with a different kind of respect. Local veterans tipped their hats, and one morning someone left a note. You brought him home after 50 years. Thank you. A small photo, Frank and Liam, arm in arm, grinning, appeared behind the counter, a brass plaque reading, never forgotten, family legacy continues. Frank didn't need the coffee anymore, just the quiet company and the sense that, at last, memory was a bridge and not a burden. Jenna's mom invited him to a small memorial planting, a new tree for Liam, whose dream of feeding people lived on, in ways he could never have imagined. Frank read the letter one last time, words finally landing on the hearts they were meant for. As they walked back to their cars, Jenna smiled, wiping away tears. You gave us closure, Frank. Now we can move forward. Frank nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. Some names fade with war, but some are carried forward by those who refuse to let go, who believe memory heals what time alone never can. So here's my question for you. What would you do to keep a promise made half a century ago? Do you think justice and closure are ever truly possible? Or do we just carry each other until we can't anymore? Drop your thoughts below, because stories like this, they don't end, they echo.